Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Today I want to talk about legendary resistance. When we start getting into the tougher monsters, we see this coming up more and more to a point where fighting creatures without this feature becomes the exception rather than the norm. I've also played in groups, multiple groups in fact, where the DMs start throwing this on homebrew monsters at really early levels. Legendary resistance is normally 3 times per day, though there are occasions where it can be different, and it doesn't require an action, it doesn't require a reaction, and allows the creature to change the result of a failed saving throw so it's successful instead. There is no way to prevent legendary resistance from working, because what it does is it makes the result of the die roll irrelevant. So even if we change that die roll with Diviner's Portent or Silvery Barbs spells, or we use a Bard's Unsettling Words, none of these things prevent legendary resistance from working. So what I see over and over again online, the take I see is that legendary resistances are especially useful in shutting down spellcasters. And as a spellcaster, what you need to do is you burn through those legendary resistances in order to land a spell. And that is the tactic you want to take. So you cast spells at the target, and if the target fails, it uses legendary resistance, and once it runs out of them, then we can win the combat by using our spells. Otherwise, we're pretty much out of luck. I kind of get where this thought process comes from. Because we start at lower levels, and we cast a spell that can shut down an enemy, but it provides a saving throw. Those can be really dramatic, and it can feel really great when that monster fails that saving throw, and then you turn it into a snail, or you paralyze it, or some other effect that basically completely obliterates it. On the other hand, when the creature makes its saving throw, with most of these kinds of spells, either nothing happens or something pretty insignificant happens. So then we start looking for ways we can make it harder for that creature to make the saving throw. Maybe we force it to reroll, or we give it disadvantage on the saving throw. We work on increasing our spell DCs, or we give it a penalty on its saving throw. These methods do tend to be pretty effective. But then we hit a creature with legendary resistance. And despite all our ways to make that saving throw harder, it just uses the legendary resistance and makes its saving throw anyways. So the next logical step is, knowing it's a limited resource, is to try to get it to run out of uses so our previous tactics will start to work again. But legendary resistance isn't like anything we faced before, especially if that creature has good saving throws to begin with, and then we're expending our spell slots and our features to try to get it to fail a saving throw that it cannot fail, and we're using our limited features as well. We're also using our action on our turn, maybe our bonus action, maybe our reaction too, and then the creature makes its save anyways. And once everything is said and done, that monster was completely unimpeded by our attempts round after round until we burn through those legendaries. So what these groups find is that legendary resistance is that feature that makes spellcasting not so great. Especially when we start to see magic resistance, which is a feature that a lot of the higher challenge rating creatures have. So now we're dealing with advantage on the initial saving throw, which maybe by expending some resources and maybe some reactions we could cancel out, but that creature isn't even needing to expend a legendary resistance on every attempt we make, and our spellcasters may not really be contributing to a combat at all until they can get through them. And as a DM and as a player, I have seen this over and over. The party faces a legendary creature, and the spellcaster starts slinging spells that provide saving throws on round 1. Then they keep throwing those spells, and they are keeping track. That's 1 legendary, 2 left. That's 2, it only has 1 left. And then the combat is over, because the party members who were actually contributing killed the creature they were fighting. The PCs walk away from a successful fight, and the spellcaster is spent. They've used their best spells, their features to impact saving throws, and they contributed nothing to that fight. They actually would have been better off just doing nothing on their turns, because at least then they wouldn't have expended their resources doing nothing. Now, I'm not saying using spells to burn through legendary resistances never works. If you get enough spells thrown at something, eventually it's going to run out. And then you stick the landing and polymorph it into a slug. But it's expensive, right? It's time consuming, and we're counting on getting lucky. And if we don't, then what we're doing isn't helping our group at all. I've always said that spellcasters have a better way. We don't need to burn through legendary resistances with a spellcaster. Legendary resistances I don't think hurt spellcasters all that much, because we can actually contribute to our party very effectively right from round 1 against a creature with legendary resistances, and that's by denying it the opportunity to use them. In my opinion, easily the most optimal way to deal with these creatures is to make sure we have spells that don't give this creature a saving throw in the first place. And when that creature is defeated, let it be defeated with all 3 legendary resistances unused. I want to highlight how you can build your spellcaster to deal with legendary resistance in this optimal way. This is a patron requested topic. High Five on my Discord asked this question. I kind of mentioned this before, but what are the odds you would do a video going over spells, abilities, combos, and tactics to use against creatures with legendary resistances, since you often mentioned to just ignore the resistances? I really like the idea of this tactic. Well, High Five, I'd say the odds are good. And honestly, it's not that complicated. It's just a matter of spell selection. We select spells that either don't provide a saving throw, or we don't care that much if it makes its saving throw. Then, when we face a creature with legendary resistances, and sometimes we know that beforehand, sometimes we do have to figure that out once the legendary resistance is used the first time, then we need to switch to these spells. I will say that once you start facing creatures with legendary resistances, you should expect the main tough creatures to have them pretty much consistently afterwards. Legendary resistance isn't like a hump you get through after you go enough levels. Soon as you start to face it, it starts to be the regular thing. Now, the list of spells I'm going to give you here isn't exhaustive, but it should give you enough options for any spellcaster you make, and it should give you the ideas you need to evaluate these spells for yourself. In fact, there are so many spells that are good against creatures with legendary resistance that I couldn't make a video that covered them all without it being just a super long video. So if you're wondering where spells like, Maze or Transmute Rock are in this list, yeah, those spells are good too, and there's many more. But I'm going to highlight at least a few of the good options. So the first kind of spells I want to talk about are just the ones that do straight damage with no saving throw. The idea here is if you can't straight out shut down the creature with spells, then you know what? We might as well assist the damage dealers in our party getting the creature to 0 hit points, because that is how we're going to defeat it. First and foremost, regardless of our spellcaster, we probably have an attack roll cantrip. If we have an Eldritch Blast and Repelling Blast, we can also move the creature with no saving throw. The drawback here is we're not contributing a lot of damage, and we do have to hit. But you know what? It is better than doing nothing. But there's a couple spells I think kind of stand out for doing damage to enemies and not giving them saving throws. First is Magic Missile. So there's no saving throw, not even an attack roll. This also upcasts. And when we're making a character planning on relying on Magic Missile, then what we want to do is find methods to add damage to every missile. And there are a number of ways to do this. Maybe I'll do a video at some point, but you know what? If you Google it, you will find results. If the enemy has the shield spell, they will be able to shut this down, but most creatures don't have shield, even the high challenge rating ones. Now, if you want to build around Magic Missile, you're probably going to need to multiclass, but high level straight evoker also does well here. But here's another great option, Spike Growth. This does damage with no saving throw, and the shield spell is not going to help you here. It's 2d4 damage per 5 feet moved in the area. So the play here is to force the movement of that creature all over that Spike Growth. This can add up to incredible damage. Warlocks should be repelling, grapplers should be dragging, and spellcasters have some options here too that don't provide saving throws, and I'll mention them when we get there. There's some other straight damage spells with no saving throw, but they usually require to hit rolls, so I generally don't go that way. Instead, what I look for are spells that deliver damage over and over again, and gives that creature a saving throw to take half damage over and over again. Because a monster just can't afford to spend legendary resistances on these kinds of spells. So, in practice, these spells actually kind of ignore legendary resistance. Okay, so Cleric, it's easy. Spirit Guardians does damage over and over, and the creature is just going to need to save over and over, and still takes half damage on a successful saving throw. The nice thing here is each instance of damage is pretty low stakes, but the strength of the spell is our ability to force those instances over and over. I mean, once per round is easy, but we can force additional instances of damage with Spirit Guardians with some forced movement. If the DM is playing the creature intelligently, Spirit Guardians isn't going to burn a single legendary resistance because the stakes are way too low for any individual saving throw. But if the DM plays the creature foolishly, well, then I guess we're going to burn through those legendaries in no time. But in most cases, though, I would expect Spirit Guardians to work just as well against a creature with legendary resistances as without. One instance of damage from Spirit Guardians just isn't worth using a legendary resistance. And that's the key. A big cast with a big damage effect once with a save for half might be worth a legendary resistance. If you do Finger of Death at a creature, it might very well use a legendary resistance and have that damage. But small amounts, over and over, they're just not worth it. We don't need to be a cleric to take advantage of this either. Moonbeam is another spell where the damage from one instance of damage isn't high, but we can inflict it over and over. And just like with Spirit Guardians, we can use force movement to have the damage occur multiple times every round. So there's a druid option for you, and like Spirit Guardians, the upcasting here is pretty good. Speaking of druids, Wall of Thorns is another such spell, and way easier to use with multiple targets. It has tactical applications as well. 78 damage with a save for half is no joke, and grapplers will love a Wall of Thorns. They can just move creatures out and then back in, and then hold them for their turn, and that creature is going to take the damage multiple times each round. Again, probably doesn't want to use its legendary resistances on this, or they'll be gone almost immediately. What about sorcerers and wizards? Well, Wall of Fire works great against creatures with legendary resistances. If you're a Scribe's Wizard, make sure to grab another 4th level damage spell like Sickening Radiance, so you can have your Wall of Fire deliver a far more reliable radiant damage. What's great about Wall of Fire is we're actually almost entirely taking away even the option of using legendary resistances. The creature affected gets one saving throw for half damage when the spell goes up, but all of the damage it inflicts afterwards doesn't get a saving throw at all. So your Wall of Fire doesn't care about legendary resistance. Make sure you have some force movement effects if you want to use this spell, otherwise it's not going to really work out well for you. Moving on, let's talk about spells where you target an ability check instead of a saving throw. You cannot use legendary resistance on an ability check. My favorites here are Telekinesis and Bigby's Hand. Let's talk about Telekinesis and I'll explain how it works. So here's Telekinesis. We cast this once, and then we basically got it for the whole fight, and maybe a couple fights afterwards. On our turn, we can grab a huge or smaller creature. We make a spellcasting ability check, and it's contested by the creature's strength check. Not a saving throw, a check. No legendary resistance. If we succeed, the creature is restrained, and we can move them 30 feet in any direction. So if we're talking combos, this is great working with Spirit Guardians and Wall of Thorns and Moonbeam and Wall of Fire, and the humble 2nd level Spike Growth. 30 feet across a Spike Growth is 12d4 damage, no saving throw. So we do damage, we restrain them, and depending on what kind of attacks they can do, maybe we just move them out of range, and then they just sit there with their 3 legendary saving throws completely unused, contemplating how it let them down. If we want to use this spell effectively, we want to win that opposed check as often as possible, and now our methods to cause rerolls, penalties, and bonuses actually work because there is no automatic success for the creature to fall back on. The ways we influence the rolls can be a bit different. A Bard's Jack of all trades helps here. Bardic Inspiration can help here. A lower Bard's Cutting Words can penalize the creature. A Sorcerer's Magical Guidance can work here. There's lots of things. This is Rak Tolkesh. I very recently actually just wrecked this guy into combat using Telekinesis with a wizard. And basically I cast Telekinesis, and there was a Rune Knight in the party, and they had Storm Rune, so they just gave me advantage on all my checks. And what I could do is I could use my Telekinesis to kind of throw him around a corner so he couldn't use his Dispel Magic on me, which he can do as a legendary action. On my turn, I would just peek around the corner, restrain him again, and then go back again, so he couldn't do anything to me. And then our ranged attackers went around the corner and attacked this guy who has a very high armor class, but they had advantage because he was restrained. And yeah, we just basically walked over him. I don't even know if he did a point of damage to us. It just totally wrecked him. I think we were 16th level at the time, maybe 15th level, but this tactic would have worked on this same creature at level 9. It really just required 2 resources, a 5th level spell, and 1 rune from a rune knight. Challenge rating 28, but his legendary resistances, at the end of this fight, he still had them all. Okay, so we have damage that can't be saved against, damage that occurs over and over, spells that target ability checks instead of saving throws. What else can we do? Well, we could buff our allies. Bless is an obvious example. If we are going to kill this creature through attack rolls, then Bless is a fantastic play because it increases the accuracy of our attacks. Look how many allies you have that make attack rolls, and upcast if you need to. Crusader's Mantle can work well in combination with other spellcasters. We'll come back to that one. Dragon's Breath can buff an ally and provide that constant instances of damage with the save for half, like we saw with spells beforehand. Polymorph can be a buff as well. Cast it on the ally with few hit points remaining, have them wail away on the enemies as a giant ape. Haste is a nice spell when you put it on a rogue. The rogue then uses their hasted action to make a sneak attack, then their regular action to ready an attack to occur right after their turn is over, and they get to sneak attack a second time. Hasting a grappler can also be really good. When that grappler drags that enemy over a spike growth, that combo can deliver ridiculous amounts of damage. This tactic is so effective, I made a whole video about it. I'll link it up above, or check it out later. It is titled Grapple Death Squad. If you want to see how the combination of spike growth, haste, and a grappler can absolutely wreck pretty much anything in the game, take a look at that video. Now, these aren't technically buffs, but using your spells to reposition allies, remove harmful effects, get them up if they go down, all that stuff doesn't care about the enemy's saving throws and can be a super effective way to use your spell slots. Next, let's talk about some of my favorite spells, wall spells. Not wall of fire, I mean solid walls. So this is a winning tactic in any role-playing game that has this kind of effect. It is super reliable. So we're facing 4 super tough enemies. What are we going to do? Well, we cast a wall spell, and what we'll do is we will separate those enemies with a wall, and then we kill 2 of them, and then we kill the other 2. So it's like fighting the same battle, except instantly we cut an enemy's offense in half. There's really no way around it unless they can teleport. And Wall of Force works here, Wall of Ice works here, Wall of Stone works here, all super effective. Wall of Force and Wall of Ice also can be used to trap an enemy completely by completely surrounding it with the wall. So you throw the wall around one really tough enemy, and then you kill its minions. And then the fight just got easy. There's no saving throw. Force Cage is huge here as well, and doesn't even use concentration. Now, if we use that tactic, and a creature can teleport, Wall of Force can be bypassed. And assuming it has legendary resistances as well, then Force Cage can be bypassed as well. But Wall of Ice is a bit different here, because it also blocks sight. Actually, what I should say is that I assume it blocks sight, because the spell actually doesn't say it blocks sight, and there are cases where perfectly formed ice that's thin and polished can be seen through, but normally you can't see through ice. I live in Canada, there's ice everywhere, all through the winter. It is white, it is not clear. So unless the creature can teleport to a place it can't see, then it cannot teleport out, and its legendary resistances just sit there. And yeah, go ahead and check out monster stats. If it has Dimension Door, it's going to be fine, but most of these teleport effects require the creature see the space it's teleporting to. So Wall of Ice is delivering here with no saving throw. But I saved the best for last. If you want to cast spells against creatures with legendary resistances, look at Summoning. Conjure Animals is the big one here. It delivers massive damage, and we can use them to also grapple creatures and do some amazing drag combos. Conjure Woodland Beings is great too, but don't discount even the more recent summoning spells. They can't deliver the same kind of damage, but They can get really reliable damage types and often ranged attacks too. And they upcast well. Often they also have secondary effects that don't provide saving throws, like a Despair Shadow Spawn automatically can reduce an enemy's speed by 20, and it still has its action to make attacks. Or summon creatures don't care about legendary resistances at all. I mean, the big plays are Conjure Animals, of course, Conjure Woodland Beings. Of course, those are just Druid spells, but we have Conjure Elemental is really good, and it's available to other classes. There's the new Summon Draconic Spirit. That's a good one, and, it's available to sorcerers who normally don't get summoning spells. Of course, Bard can use magical secrets and get summoning from any class they want to. Or they could use Animated Objects, which is kind of a summoning spell. Pretty much whatever class you are, there are good options. And if you do summon a lot of creatures, here's where we combo a Crusader's Mantle from another caster to increase the damage of every single attack. When you're facing damage resistance, this can effectively negate it because the Crusader's Mantle damage is ultra reliable. So we have damage spells that don't give a save, we have damage spells that deliver over and over again, we have spells that target ability checks instead of saving throws, we have spells that don't provide a saving throw, we have wall spells, we have summoning spells. Why on earth would a caster choose to try to burn legendary resistances from a challenging enemy rather than do any of those things? It's honestly beyond me. If they understand that spells are versatile. If the player believes that spells work this way, they cast a spell, the enemy makes a saving throw, and if they fail, something good happens, and if they succeed, you try again next round, then I get it. But that's not a problem with spellcasting. That's a problem with not understanding how many things a spellcaster can do, and how a well-played spellcaster can work around defenses of an enemy rather than trying to bulldoze through them. I hope I have explained that legendary resistance isn't a spellcaster's problem. Spellcasters can ignore legendary resistance. Where legendary resistance is a problem is for other classes, because a lot of other classes have saving throw effects, and they don't have the versatility of spellcasters. But if you are a spellcaster, then all that it requires is choosing spells that don't care. And I hope I have made my point there, and I hope it is helpful to you. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.